Yes, the meeting with CIA Director John Ratcliffe took place, but there is nothing unusual about that. Meetings between heads, whether in person or online, are simply part of the work of special services. I should mention, for instance, that I meet almost weekly with the heads of various special services and intelligence agencies from all over the world. The meeting with John Ratcliffe was a standard working engagement. We discussed a number of issues falling within the purview of intelligence services. And the remit of intelligence services, as you well understand, is a rather delicate and specialized matter.
A secret trip to Moscow by CIA Director John Ratcliffe has now emerged as one of the most intriguing diplomatic moves by the Trump administration. The visit was not announced in advance, and according to reports citing people familiar with the matter, Ratcliffe traveled to the Russian capital with a warning for Moscow. Do not escalate the war beyond Ukraine, and do not test NATO's resolve. The most sensitive part of that warning reportedly involved the Baltic states. The Wall Street Journal reported that Ratcliffe warned Russian officials against attacking NATO countries during his visit. People familiar with the meeting said the focus was particularly on Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, the three Baltic nations on Russia's western flank. The message was reportedly straightforward. Any military escalation against a NATO ally could trigger a much wider confrontation with the United States and Europe. The CIA has not publicly detailed the contents of the meetings, and that leaves one major question hanging over the trip. What exactly did Washington believe Russia might do? The trip came as Russia and Ukraine continued exchanging increasingly intense drone and missile attacks, including strikes deep behind the front lines. At the same time, Moscow has issued increasingly sharp warnings toward countries supporting Kyiv. Washington and European governments have been particularly concerned about the possibility of Russia expanding its confrontation through sabotage, cyber attacks, or other forms of hybrid warfare. And this is where the Baltic states become crucial. There is no public evidence that Russia was preparing an imminent full-scale attack on a NATO country. But the reported warning suggests Washington wanted to make one thing absolutely clear before any potential escalation became irreversible. Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania are NATO members. All three also border Russia or are directly exposed to Russian military power. A conflict involving any of them would immediately carry a dramatically different set of consequences from the current Russia-Ukraine war. Under NATO's collective defense principle, an armed attack against one member is treated as an attack against the alliance. That means a military move against the Baltics could potentially turn a regional conflict into a direct confrontation between Russia and NATO. The reported meeting, therefore, appears to have been less about negotiating a peace agreement and more about establishing a red line. Ratcliffe, according to the accounts, warned Russian officials against taking military action that could drag NATO directly into the conflict. The timing is significant. Russia's war in Ukraine has already created the biggest security crisis in Europe in decades. But Moscow's confrontation with the West has increasingly extended beyond the battlefield. That broader threat is why Washington's message reportedly extended beyond conventional military attacks. Russia has repeatedly been accused by Western governments of using covert or hybrid tactics against European targets. These allegations have included cyber operations, sabotage, and attacks on critical infrastructure. Recent attacks involving European defense-related facilities have also raised questions about whether the conflict is increasingly spilling into the wider European security environment. The strategy allows Moscow to put pressure on Western countries without necessarily crossing the threshold that would trigger a conventional military response. But the Baltic warning was reportedly not the only issue on Ratcliffe's agenda. According to people familiar with the trip, the CIA director also raised Russia's growing military and economic relationship with Iran. This is where the Moscow mission becomes even more complicated. Washington is simultaneously confronting Iran and Russia, two countries that have increasingly cooperated in areas involving defense and security. The United States wants Moscow to reduce that support. One UK official familiar with the matter said Ratcliffe pressed Russian officials to stop providing weapons and defense technology to Tehran. Russia has been accused of helping strengthen Iran's military capabilities, including its drone arsenal. Any deeper cooperation between Moscow and Tehran could make the wider confrontation with Iran more difficult for Washington. And that is particularly important as the United States expands economic pressure on Iran. Ratcliffe reportedly warned Moscow against overreacting if sanctions begin affecting Russian interests. So the CIA chief was effectively carrying two messages into Moscow. Do not escalate against NATO, and do not deepen your military support for Iran. But President Donald Trump has played down the drama surrounding the visit. Trump described the trip as semi-routine and said its purpose was connected to efforts to bring the Russia-Ukraine war to an end. The president also rejected speculation that Ratcliffe had been dispatched because Washington feared Russia was preparing to test NATO. Trump's comments suggest the administration does not want the Moscow visit portrayed as an emergency diplomatic intervention. The Kremlin eventually confirmed that Ratcliffe had visited Moscow, but officials offered few details about what was discussed. The administration in Washington had also not publicly
They started with just an idea. The world calls it a startup. They call it a labor of love. Some burned out, some broke through, but every single one had a story worth hearing. This is where founders speak without filters, where investors reveal what they actually look for, where failure is just another chapter. Because no matter where the journey takes you, you're always asking the same question: what next?
If you like this video, then like, share and subscribe to Mirror Now.